So now it's time to get into our panel sessions. We've seen major shifts in technology adoption in the last year, but we've also seen how not-for-profits feel under-resourced, time poor, and don't have the expertise to implement technology that can rapidly boost efficiencies and help them on the front line in supporting the causes that matter most. So for our first panel session, we're discussing the future of the sector and the role of technology. After last year, what are some of the challenges we faced, the risks, the opportunities? Allow me to introduce your panelists. Sue Woodward, AM, the Commissioner of the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission. Dr. Cassandra Goldie, AO, CEO of the Australian Council of Social Service. Doug Taylor, CEO of the Smith Family. Dr. Brett Schmeda, General Manager of the National Artificial Intelligence Center. And our host, Matthew Schultz, Editor of Our Community at the Institute of Community and Directors Australia. And a little fun fact we found out that Sue Woodward's 4 kids and her were all born the same week. All right, guys, come on up. Another fun fact. This session is proudly brought to you by Seer Data and Analytics. Fun fact there is Seer Data and Analytics was in the Muridi Accelerator, so I know Christy and team very well. And we thank them for their partnership this year, and make sure you say a big hello to their team during the breakouts. They are awesome. Over to you.
Make sure I've got that right. How's that? All right. Well, look, it's fantastic to be here. It's very exciting. It's a bit nerve-wracking being up on the stage with such high-powered individuals, but I'm very excited about this conversation. I think everyone here is too. So, look, without giving you too much background about me, I'll just to say that I write for the Institute of Community Directors, and we're actually just published something about Marnie's great presentation just before. Thanks, Greg. And we'll be covering this conference too, and so we'll be putting out some news about it. So keep an eye on that, and that's why we're very happy to be one of the partners. Look, let's just start off with talking a bit about your agendas, because obviously things are changing very rapidly. And everyone here is really curious what's next. Now, I have to start with you, Cassandra, because, yes, I know, sorry, because, look, we've just, on the back of an election, there's opportunities there. I know that you realise that. I'm really interested to know how you're going to prosecute your push for equity with the new government. You know, there's opportunities there, right?
Absolutely. Look, I'm also thrilled to be here at this fantastic gathering, both in person and online. And I am acknowledging country and paying respect to First Nations people all over Australia, and say how delighted I am to see that we have reaffirmed our commitment to First Nations leadership and self-determination in this country. And to your, Marnie, what a fantastic presentation. Don't you think?
Yeah.
I loved your theme there around the solidarity. It's a really key thing, I think, for us to discuss, in the ways in which we can use technologies. And good on you, David, for bringing us together. So it's a wonderful discussion for us. And Renata Frowns from ACOS is also here with us today. So we're listening very keenly. I think this is an area of, I talk a fair bit about megatrends. And we've just actually stopped in our tracks a little bit, I think, in Australia on a megatrend with the outcome of this election, and the fact that the communities that of which we are a part and that we seek to represent certainly were a part of turning up and choosing the kind of country that we actually want to deliver. But I know in this room, we're all very alive to the reality that as we woke up, there were still millions of people in Australia who are going without. The economic inequalities are very serious, and that is globally, and that sort of trend that Marnie talked about in terms of the silencing and efforts to silence civil society is in part one of the aspects of why economic inequalities have grown, and we are no different. We have not got the big investments that we need yet into tackling the core cost of living issues for people who are the most disadvantaged. And I know everybody in this conference today is really thinking about how we can use the best of technologies and AI to forge the next stage of the collaboration, for us to be ensuring that the stories and experiences of people, including in Australia, which is so shocking that we do have millions of people every year who are literally choosing between eating and heating their home, that they are unable to leave their house because they cannot afford the social isolation that's intense when you have virtually nothing, and often the shame that seems to be attached to that experience, and that is intense in a very wealthy country actually, because you see around you that everybody else is debating how much the price of coffees are, and for some people they never go to buy a cup of coffee. And that's a lot of people in our country, in the food banks. You know, we know this experience, and of course Ask Izzy David tells that story very powerfully. So we are here to link arms again and to say absolutely we have a moment in the history of Australia where we can drive a very different future. And so there's a few things I wanted to highlight. I think there's no question that we have to stand up and assert the powerful role and value of civil society, including people-led communities and organisations. I was listening to, for example, the Finance Minister. Well, we're waiting to find out whether she's going to be the Finance Minister again this morning. And she said, great, the agenda for Australia is productivity. Okay, well, we can work with that because we know that technology and AI actually has enormous opportunities in terms of productivity, but for what purpose? And of course, we're all very alive to the reality that we can have data-driven experiences which are devastating. Marnie, I hope you've heard about Robodebt, and I hope you tell that story all over the world about lessons learned, and we have not actually implemented the changes yet to ensure that that kind of experience doesn't happen again. For those involved in employment services, the Targeted Compliance Framework, which is the digitally driven compliance system, which is one of the most brutal around the world, has actually been paused because of the technology flaws in that, and those who are involved with people who are in that system, how brutal that has been, the constant targeting of you through automated or algorithmic sort of driving of decision making around who gets targeted. So these are very big experiences happening right now here in Australia. So I'm really keen for us to acknowledge that we have to assert, and I know the push to get a digital fund for the sector is very important. The blueprint work, I was really pleased my colleague Rob Sturrock worked with you, Doug, and others to bring together this NFP blueprint, and you probably talk about it as well. That I think we were really struck by how nascent actually this is in Australian civil society. You know, the fact that our first ask is, can we do some of the basics like security, Marnie? You know, when you talk about it, yes, we're very aware of it, but we have not got a government that puts the community sector front and centre. There's a lot of talk about productivity in business, and that's can be very excluding of the community sector. So I think this is sort of first order of business for us as we seek to engage again with a new government. It is coming in as they'll have new ministerial arrangements to be very clear about we have to be a part of this, and not only a part of the transformation. I think in the concern, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this, that the rise of the far right in Australia is still real. It is real. And what is more important than ever, and to be a counterforce to that, is love, community, and human connection.
Which brings me to...
Yeah, and so that the way we use technology not to disconnect ourselves from human beings, but actually to use the efficiencies out of that so that we can spend more time, real time, with real people, caring for each other and looking after communities and the social outcomes that can come from that.
Yeah. And I mean, that brings me to you, Doug, because you're at the coalface of this, right? And in our preview conversation, you said that digital inclusion has to be at the very heart of the work that this sector is doing, and you sort of bring that into all of your work. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, happy to. And I know that it's something that's important to this audience, and I know there's a lot of good comrades in the building who are working on this as we speak, and so appreciation to them for all their efforts on that. So, I mean, I don't know about you at the moment, but I feel like every second week I'm sitting in a workshop talking about AI. It's just the constant conversation. It'll be a feature of our conversation today. I was in one of those last week in Redfern in Sydney, and I looked out the window over to Waterloo, public housing community, a couple of big towers. And I realised that 20 years ago, I was running around New South Wales putting in internet cafes in public housing estates. Remember internet cafes? Remember those things? So we were doing that to try and this is back working with Info Exchange, right back all that time ago. And I realised that we're still doing that. We're talking about AI, this incredibly enabling opportunity. Yes, there are risks, but we're still fundamentally talking about inclusion, and AI, if not addressed with a focus on a digital guarantee, will just see the gap widen. That Cassandra has very eloquently talked about. So it's very much a priority for us at the Smith family. So we're focused on addressing educational inequality. 30% of the 71,000 students that we support go home every night to a household without a digitally connected laptop. You all know what that means, how it contributes to the challenge they have with their education. So for a young person who experiences disadvantage by the age of 15, they're on average 4.5 years behind their peers. Digital exclusion is a sad contributor to that. You look at NAPLAN data, we all look at that sort of information. 50% of Year 10 students don't meet minimum ICT proficiency standards. Think about that, 50%. We think we've got a cohort of digital natives. Yes, we do, but in terms of having the skills that are really necessary for a future workforce and to be fully participating and making the most of a digital economy, we're way behind. So we see that absolutely in our work, as do many of our peers. That's one of the reasons why we're very much focused on a national device bank, and I saw Jess here from Good Things Foundation. Hey Jess, and I'm sure there are others as well, because we see a great opportunity to ensure that all people have the great benefit of fully participating in society and the economy through digital inclusion. So I think what I would just say in kind of a framing statement is, let's think about all the incredible opportunities, and at Smith Family we're baked into those things with AI and digitising and all those sorts of things, but let's put an inclusion and equity lens over all of these things. That's our role in this sector, to remind corporate partners, stakeholders and government that we've got to have this in place. And from an advocacy perspective, I think we've talked about the sector blueprint, but if you look at the National Digital Strategy, the focus on inclusion is nowhere near comprehensive as it needs to be. And great to see some steps in New South Wales and other states that perhaps you're coming from, but we've got a long way to go if we really want to focus on addressing digital poverty, which is one of those new frontiers. And it's sad that we're also talking about those ones that have been around, those barriers that have been around for some time, as well as these newer ones. So we've got to have that focus front and centre as well.
Oh, well said. And now to you, Sue. I'm really interested in the fact that this is a huge sector, and you have oversight of some of that. Perhaps you could give us a bit of a sense of where we've come from in the last, say, 5 to 10 years, while you've in terms of the ACNC, and the way that you see maybe in the short term the importance of that workforce to delivering on these issues of equity.
Thanks, Matt. I do have to say something first, though. I was the only person who provided the fun fact. And I feel like I'm hanging out there because I wouldn't have done that if I hadn't thought my colleagues would have stepped in with me. And I think that's interesting for a regulator to provide a fun fact about it. So I will never again do that. But those of you online and in the room, please keep that close. And I would also like to acknowledge, it's a shame not to meet Uncle Tony today, but I'm a national regulator, and like Cass, I would like to acknowledge First Nations people across this country and thank them for their custodianship of this very beautiful place we get to live and work and enjoy. And Marnie, if you get to see some of Australia, I would highly recommend it. To answer your question, the number of charities has increased, so now I can say here I'm the national regulator for about 64,000 charities. and the contribution they make to the economy. We have the data, longitudinal data. We will be releasing probably in about a month's time our 11th annual report on that. So we collect all the data that the sector painstakingly give to us, and part of our commitment back to the sector is to give that data so that the contribution really stands out. And one of the reasons I get up and go to my job every day is because I really believe in the contribution that the sector make. It's not just the economic contribution, which is very, very significant. It's also that it is the social glue for our society. But interestingly, the data consistently shows that it's also a major employer, and that trend is growing. It's not that this is a declining sector in terms of employment. And my favourite, we say money, barbecue fact is that the sector employs, the last report showed 10.5% of the paid workforce work for registered charities. Now that is not the whole of the not-for-profit sector by any means, but even just that amount is huge. And then if you add in the volunteer contribution, which has, took a bit of a hit in COVID, is coming back, and we'll have more data on that. That's millions of people. And again, I wouldn't suggest our data captures all the volunteering contribution, but it does give you that longitudinal picture. So in terms of what's changed for me, I've been in my role as the Commissioner for just over 2 years now. I did work in the sector for a long period of time. I've sat on boards of organisations, including the Victorian Organisation for Social Services, so in Cass's orbit. And I think what I've seen when I've come back to my role as Commissioner is how frequent, as you said, Doug, the conversations are about AI. And I'm really pleased today to have the opportunity to be at this conference, because it doesn't just include the word technology, includes that word together with the purpose of the technology. The particular focus here is social justice, but certainly even for the broader sector. So if you just say society, for the good of society, and I would bring it back to, those charities using the tools that they can to have the impact that they need to have to achieve their charitable purpose. And I've been reflecting on the difference between the size of organisations in the sector. So we have global charities, Australian charities that have global footprint. And then we have large charities, and we have some medium-sized charities, but we have a huge, huge number of very, very small micro charities. Most of them are entirely volunteer run. Now, it is easy to fall to thinking, it must be really hard for them, they don't have any resources. It is hard for them. If you're a small volunteer-run charity, there's no doubt that can be a really, there's a restriction on your resources. But this technology, for those that are able to use it for their purpose, with exactly the checks and balances that I think Marnie, you so beautifully described, and I know InfoExchange has dedicated so much time and energy to making sure that the really good hygiene is there, can deliver really in very creative ways. And that then the people power, which I really hope we never lose, and the data would show we are not losing, can be used to have the best impact that people have that are not doing those, machine type standard things, or using it in a creative way. And this conference is the hotbed of those new ideas. So I'm really glad to be here today about that.
Well, thank you very much, Sue. Look, before we go on, let me remind you about the Slido. We are very keen to hear what your questions and comments are. I know some of the panellists here are very interested in what your views are about which way this sector is going. So if you've got some pointy questions, please send them our way. And if you like those questions, upvote them and they'll float to the top of the screen. So, but to you, Brett, and picking up what you were just saying then, Sue, you have noticed that it's, especially perhaps with the smaller organisations, it's a bit, I mean, you described it as a bit of a Wild West out there with the number of organisations just picking up these tools and running with them. Perhaps you can describe some of the work that you're doing to enable those organisations to use those tools properly and safely.
Absolutely, and thank you for the invite to come along. And so, acknowledging, of course, the Aboriginal lands that we're on today as well, and elders past and present. So, unlike Sue, I'm from within the government, but we're not a regulator. We are National AI Centre are an industry-facing and community-facing body, and so the goal of the National AI Centre is to help organisations around Australia to uplift their AI competency and maturity across Australia. So it's how can we really get after the opportunity that everyone's seeing coming on us like a wave, and what can we do about that? I figure based on the discussion that I heard here, I'll start with a couple of statistics that I feel like illustrate the case really well, which is that there was, first of all, there was a University of Melbourne and KPMG report that was released last week, and they did a survey of over 48,000 people across 47 different countries across the world. And in that, Australia had amongst the lowest trust in AI systems. Alongside that statistic, we of course have Info Exchange's own digital technology in the not-for-profit sector report. And that shows that 76% of not-for-profits are gobbling up and using conversational or generative AI like crazy, but that only 11% of you have some sort of policy, procedure, governance system in place to manage the use of that AI technology. So how do we reconcile those two things against one another? And from what we are seeing at the National AI Centre, we think it's that there's a willingness, there's a hunger to adopt these things because, of course, all of the not-for-profit, for-purpose charity sector, they're operating on duct tape and string. They're looking to do anything that they can do to be as efficient as possible. But their organisations don't have the ability, don't have the competency to help them with the structures, the tools, the resources they need. So they don't want to be left behind this massive social change, and they obviously want to use the opportunity as best they can, but how do they get after it? So the National Artificial Intelligence Centre tries to help scaffold with some of these supporting tools. We have various tools and things that we'll be picking up in various questions, I'm sure. Amongst the bigger ones, we've got a voluntary AI safety standard. This is some best practice AI sort of governance solutions about how to govern AI in your organisation and deliver it in a human-centric manner, which I think is very important to everybody in this room. They're getting more ground to earth because, while standards are very important and other things, for a 4 or 5 person organisation, sometimes that seems very big, very hard to implement. We also work on toolkits and other implementable things for you and your organisation. So, for example, we are working to take the learnings of the voluntary safety standard and how do we distill that down to some guidance of if I'm procuring or using AI somehow in my organisation, what are the questions I need to be talking to my vendors about? What do I need to be talking about how my data is used and other things like that so that I'm using it safely and responsibly? And finally, of course, we partner with lots of organisations across Australia, like the Governance Institute, like Standards Australia, like Info Exchange, of course, and running workshops that help CEOs, board leaders, others to meet them where they are, build their competency around digital capability in AI. And free plug, we've got a workshop tomorrow here at the Info Exchange around supporting your NFP in AI, ethical AI implementation and usage. So if you're here, please come along.
Oh, thanks for that, Brett. Yes. Look, Cassandra, I'm just picking up on some of the implications of artificial intelligence for our entire economy, but particularly for our sector. And I mean, you mentioned recently the issue of the fall in the number of entry-level jobs, the changing nature of work. What do you see the role of the community sector is in both enabling people to continue to work while also using these tools? What is our responsibility around that? It's a bit complicated, but...
Well, it's been a hot topic for quite a long time about, the changing nature of paid work and sort of the extent to which this particular mega trend is also going to be another major force of driving inequalities because a lot of entry-level work that often might be described as sort of very routine type activity work is being replaced by AA and other sort of, aspects of technology drivers. I in this environment, I always go, and then we are human beings who will seek to have human endeavour together. And so I think for us as the community sector, we need to be at the front of finding a way to redescribe how communities actually come together and spend time in an economic way. We've got an energy transformation going on on our hands. I can tell you what, there's a lot of great work that will be coming from actually a major transformation that has to happen in the energy systems. And we're negotiating around what's called the social compact around sort of skills development and education and training to make sure that people are being able to move into the next tiers of skills, skills base that we need. And I referred to this as a very serious aspect of sort of social isolation. We are not unique with that, but I think we know it's very toxic. From home affairs through, we actually know how critical it is that we create environments where people actually do get to spend more time together and be cared by others. And the traditional notion of the family has, of course, also changed in who actually does that. We have, none of us want to see that as we become older, that we are cared for by technology. We actually need to be seen and be visible and not annihilated and disappeared behind technology. So I think our role is to carve out with determination that those are critical roles on multiple levels for the economy itself, for social outcomes, and also for fostering, a more democratic environment that we need. Because I think we should be very concerned that there is. Australia has a big problem in raising tax. Have you noticed that? We are still, as of today, the 9th lowest in terms of our overall tax base. And so, within the sort of the halls of government and bureaucracy, good people are under pressure constantly to find ways to save money. And we have to back in a different discussion to say, actually, we've got to be investing more in the kind of economic activity and social activity, which is human beings, and the technology sits behind that of unleashing the efficiencies, so that we're not spending time on things that actually we don't need to spend time on. But I am concerned that we don't allow this the drive, and I mentioned that again about sort of putting productivity at the centre at the federal government level. That can be heard as code for efficiencies, saving more money. That's not what it's about, and I think we really have to take that up to say this is not about losing more jobs. It's actually about putting more care customers into Centrelink. Real people on the end of a phone who can actually provide support, and they are supported with the technologies to do a better job.
What Sue was saying before about the size of the sector, and what you're saying as well in terms of the fact that our sector is going to be expected to deliver a lot of the government's new agenda. With 10% of the workforce and with providing all those social services, human services. I know that you, Doug, have looked, with the Smith family, looked at transforming the way that you do business while maintaining that kind of humanity. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about how you've managed to do that.
Sure. Well,
in the face of some difficult times as well.
We're learning. I think that's the best way. We're all learning, and so. Our strategy as an organisation, as I said, we're focused on addressing education and equality, and we want to reach more young people who experience that inequality, and also deepen our impact because of the nature of the gap that so many of those young people experience. So data, digitisation, digital inclusion, AI are all core elements of our strategy, and we're finding ways to invest in those opportunities as best we can, but also be very focused on the first principle of do no harm. And so again, learning a lot about how to address the cyber risk and invest in that appropriately, which is hugely challenging. Just on the AI side, great points by Cass. And I think from that perspective, I think the opportunity is to really think about a good principle-based approach to AI in all of our organisations. Needs to be on the government's agenda. It is, and there's some work obviously in train. We know that governments move slowly, glacially at times, and so the ability of governments to get ahead of these challenges is questionable. Arguably, we've seen that with social media in terms of a generation of young people who've experienced a lot of those challenges that we now see, and we were way too slow. And we can argue the merits of a government's policy around social media bans and the like. So I think there's a huge opportunity to really shape those principles for our organisations to advocate and influence corporations and the principles they use, and in turn government, so we don't see some of the risks play out, be it around equity, obviously environmental impacts, and that kind of human first agenda. So I mean, at the Smith family, we see incredible opportunities with AI, both from an efficiency perspective, but the filter on efficiency is always effectiveness. So the degree to which we can demonstrate better outcomes for the young people that we're absolutely focused on. And so we're looking at we've been on this journey for a number of years on our fundraising side, using bots and other forms of efficiency that shows incredible results. But just about, or now, trialling an AI tutoring model with 700 of our students. It's not a silver bullet for all the young people who have fallen behind in their education, but it's a really interesting opportunity to find a scalable solution. It's going to be hard to scale up a teacher workforce to get to all the young people who've fallen behind, even though the Better Fairer Schools Agreement will put new money 14 years late after the Gonski reforms, but it's there and it's going to trickle out, which is great. So we'll be really interested in terms of those outcomes for those young people, also starting a trial on digital co-workers as well. But the principles guiding that have to really shape how we undertake that work.
Oh, well said. Actually, Sue, I wanted to ask you, I understand that the ACNC also conducted its own sort of pilot work around using AI systems. Now, obviously, that's a big challenge for an agency like you, because you've got to sort of provide that service, but at the same time not go outside the colouring lines. So perhaps you could say a little bit about that and how it went.
Sure, we were part of the federal government's co-pilot testing group, so we participated in that and very much contributed to the report, and that's been released, and we will, it's important that we stay within the colouring lines that you say. So we, at the moment, as we've got the transparency statement on our website, so we don't use AI in any of our decision making, and we are within we look for opportunities when we can. We're really keen to know what's happening in the sector. So yes, I run an organisation just like people in this room are involved in running organisations, and we need to look at how we can deploy our resources, which are not likely to increase anytime soon, and how we can use AI safely in that way, so that we've got free up people to talk to the charities on the phone, which we still absolutely commit to do. So we make sure that we put them at the analysis part of the applications to make sure they're really assessed in a fair and appropriate way. I think the main interest, perhaps as the regulator that we have, is not getting in the way, very keen not to stifle innovation. You know your charities better than anyone, you know your communities better than anyone. That's not my job at all, but we do have a role to reassure the public that needs to have public trust and confidence in organisations that are registered charities that they might want to donate to, volunteer to, they want to get services from, that there is good governance that comes with those opportunities. And we're very keen to always understand the pressures on that governance and to work with our government colleagues around signposting to where there are really good resources, and we, signposting to sector-based resources as well, to support organisations and people on boards who are very often volunteers and can feel completely overwhelmed with, fancy words about, data breach policies can sound pretty complicated if you're used to helping young people go camping. It's, that's sort of perhaps the place that I come from, is the governance aspect.
And it's trying to make it easily digestible for those organisations, and especially those many small ones out there.
Yeah, and perhaps I was really conscious of Marnie's point, sitting here as a regulator. I haven't always been a regulator, but we don't want to be bureaucratic and get in the way. We don't want to put hurdles up that stop new organisations with new ideas taking up their role in civil society. So we very much try to have a report once, use often. You know, we try to reduce red tape. That's certainly a strong part of our mandate. And you know, I do sit in an international environment. I'm very connected with my international colleagues. We've had quite a lot of countries approach us to have conversations about what we're doing. And I always try to take those meetings so that if we, from our vantage point in Australia, can have some influence in those countries where the civil society regime is quite different, I certainly try to do that.
I wanted to ask you, Brett, you kind of raised the issue of the fact that there's this wave of change happening and that we don't want smaller organisations to be swamped by it, but actually be able to engage in it. Now, you've done a lot of work with AI sprints, for instance, and you've demonstrated that there's a lot of amazing work being done out there. And I think one of the other things that you said that I was really interested in was the fact that the superpower of this sector is the fact that we're kind of a bit more open to sharing ideas and collaborating and stuff. Can you kind of expand a bit on some of those examples and that power?
Absolutely, and I think we just heard from Cassandra and Doug in terms of like two sides of the same coin, in the sense of we don't want to have AI come in and replace a entry-level series of jobs, for example. But if we had a greater capacity to help people with an army of digital workers per se, then that's actually a huge opportunity. So it's a tool, but we've got to choose how we use the tool and how we use it to make humans be at the centre of all of these conversations. I mean, I noticed an example on the Slido as well around, what are specific use cases where we've got examples of that being the case. So I'll give you two that we've heard from our circulation. One would be, of course, familiar to anyone who was here last year from Justice Connect, because they won the Info Exchange Technology Engagement Award last year. So they had the huge problem of so many people needing legal services that they couldn't actually get the requests to the right kind of legal services in a timely fashion. So they worked with the University of Melbourne to build a structured AI intake and triage agent where you come in, you describe your problem in natural language, because often a disadvantaged person doesn't know that they need a housing lawyer or an employment lawyer, for example. So they describe the problem in natural language. It then takes that, analyses that, and helps funnel that to the right kind of service through Justice Connect, and furthermore gives the individual a package that they can take back to other providers. So if they need to re-describe their problem, they're not being re-traumatized over and over again, which I think is really, really important. Another that came through our work is that we ran an AI sprint last year. Very briefly, this was an initiative trying to get AI companies to solve some of Australia's biggest, most chunky problems. And we framed up problems like the cost of living crisis. Productivity, of course, was in there, but there was also things like climate change and other things like that. And we had a range of really excellent people that came out over the course of 3 months, coming from a concept to a product that they were showing in front of people, from music apps to a whole bunch of people working in the inclusion space, in other things like this. One of my favourites, Kindship, developed what I colloquially refer to as like an NDIS navigator. So they had realised the difficulty of people finding the right services within the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and so they developed an AI agent where you describe, say you've got a child with a disability, you describe your problem to this AI agent, and they make sure that they handle the data in a privacy-preserving and confidential way, but use the information that you provide about your child and their needs to then say, well, based on this, we recommend that you reach out to the following service providers who may be able to help optimise your care of your child. So I think both of these are really good examples of making sure that we're putting the human at the heart, making sure that we're really using the technology to leverage and enhance the opportunities available.
You go, Kes.
I was just going to say, we've talked about AI, but I also think the data picture is really critical. And I think for a long time, for those of you who are involved in different kinds of sort of human service, we've been very troubled by the damaging effects of, competition policy and what that has done. The way in which that has been a driver of preventing collaboration, preventing innovation around the sharing of data in a safe and appropriate way. And just yesterday I was spending time with one of your colleagues describing they know how much valuable information they have about communities. The only portal that receives it goes straight into government and it never comes out the other way. And I know many colleagues are very frustrated by this. We want to talk to each other. We want to spend time in communities where you are and to be as open source appropriately as you can be. So we're actually building systems of collaboration, in particular locations and also on particular issues. And of course, we also have a big problem that many of these government contracts lock you down. You're not allowed to share the data, actually. And we have, a trend of locking down through non-disclosure agreements and other aspects of this. And so I think to the opportunity, I do think also after almost 30 years now of this experiment, Treasury is doing a review of the damaging effects of competition policy and how we can do this differently. Having had several conversations with secretaries across the Commonwealth, there is a significant interest in working with us together to transform us into more collaborative environments. And of course, one of the opportunities out of that is the kinds of examples that you're describing we can really do with confidence. And we can, I think also ensure that people are not, for example, understanding what employment opportunities are available in a particular location, that is currently locked down because of the competition culture between different service providers. We don't share that in a public way so that people can see it. So I think this is a really important theme, and I don't know whether you were going to touch on it a bit, but I think we really could come together with government over this to say we've got to rethink competition and move to collaboration and how technology and data can source it. I mean, government is data matching big time, as you know, not always to great effect through the PLADIP. Do you know that one? Everybody knows that by now? Have you heard of the MADIP or the PLADIP? The people level integrated data asset, which means that across government now they are all absolutely integrating the big data sets they collect you from the tax office, from Centrelink. All the data on you is being data matched together and pooled and used within government, and there are some protocols about getting access to that, but it's not for obvious reasons open source, ethical issues, etc. But certainly government is well down the path in terms of the data matching for a range of purposes. Yeah.
Just a comment, if I can, on a couple of those things. So the use cases was an area of interest, and I think that Brett had some good insights. So some of the things that we're looking at the moment, we just done our scan and we're now building up those cases and thinking about where we focus and start to iterate. So looking right across the organisation, certainly back office, obviously, in finance, and really interesting areas around compliance, using AI to ensure kind of always-on compliance, which I know will be of interest to our regulator and potentially others from that sector in the building. But, really terrific opportunity there. But equally, in terms of our practice, not replacing our frontline practice, but ensuring and helping our frontline team members being more working in line with our practice framework by providing resources and prompts and all those sorts of things, which we know if you've got a strong evidence base that informs your practice, you want to ensure that you're fulfilling that. So a tremendous array of opportunities. Cass is right on the data side. It's an incredible currency. We know about the risks. Perhaps we'll talk more about that. My colleague Anne Hampshire will talk later today about this incredible opportunity that we've got with education departments across the country to access government data to help us inform our frontline practice. I won't steal her thunder. We hope there's more precedent through that work and others so that we can get access to the goldmine that's government data that can help us do our jobs better, fundamentally. That's all we really want. There was a great question that got a lot of likes here. How can charities ensure their move to digital efficiency doesn't leave anyone behind? Really good question. In human services, we talk a lot about the no wrong door principle, it applies in a digital environment as well. So 90% of the families that we support use a portal that creates great efficiency for us in terms of how we make our scholarships available, how we provide resources, how we nudge behavioural change and the like. But that's not a silver bullet. We need people to find a pathway to work with us however they choose. And that's the point. It's got to be person-centred, and we've got to be guided by how they want to get the support they need. So the risk is that our drive to digitisation creates another barrier, and we don't want that if we've got a driver around equity.
Just a general point about how these kinds of points can get filtered into government. I mean, I know that Dean Smith, who's the opposition charities spokesman, a little bit on the outer obviously now, but suggested that there should be a round table to address some of these key issues around cybersecurity, those kinds of things. With the workplace, would people here support something like that? Or what other vehicle can we use to sort of influence government? I know we also have the not-for-profit sector development blueprint. There's Productivity Commission reports that haven't been responded to yet. So does anyone want to sort of pick up on that?
I'll jump in, and maybe Cass will go to the blueprint, which I think we should start with. It's a great document and a great foundation. I think the other thing to call out in the mix here is the whole Pay What It Takes campaign. I hope there's awareness in the room about that. If there isn't, get online and Google it. We know that investing in this area is an overhead expense, and we know the challenge we have with funders appropriately investing in overheads or indirect costs. And we know the kind of public perception, the negative perception about overheads. We've got to break that. It's just a total nonsense. All these things that we're talking about can help us drive efficiency and effectiveness and better outcomes. So we now need appropriate levels of investment in our organisations. That's a conversation we've got to have with government. We're 85% privately funded at the Smith family. So it's a conversation we've got to have with the Australian public about really valuing our organisations, not-for-profit organisations, and seeing us as not backyard operators who operate on the smell of an oily rag, but organisations that provide essential services and make an enormous difference and provide that kind of foundational capacity in organisation. I think David Crosby's here today. I think I saw him up the back. David makes a really good point that we've got to muscle up in our advocacy with government. We see business have great influence, and Cass does a great job as well, but we've got to get stronger traction and really see us as worthwhile investments in the Australian community. That's an ongoing piece of work, I think.
Yeah, I mean, look, I made the point in my opener that it has gone on for too long that when governments talk about the economy, they immediately go straight to private sector. It's sort of like the default, and that's always where and we've got to work with the business on productivity. We've got to work with business on deregulation. We've got to work with business, and then we sort of seem to allow the charitable sector or the community sector to sort of be, and we'll step in to pick things up, when they don't work, kind of mentality, this notion that somehow, we're not an important part of the overall economy, as we clearly are. And I think we continue to ratchet that up, to from the very beginning of this, government coming in, that it's not acceptable for us to have really important work. The blueprint is a policy document which I want to thank everybody that was involved in that. And it sets out an agenda which is very sharp and very clear, but it can't sit off the side of government. It actually needs to be brought right into the centre. And I do think there are officials who really understand that, actually. And I think this is a chance for us, Doug, to really go in a very solid way together to say, if you want to tackle the challenges that are coming next, we are your key partner, actually, on a number of fronts, because we will be the ones on the ethical questions. We will be the ones in the Royal Commissions that may come supporting people to be heard when there are failures, and so you need to work with us up front. And I just think that's a shared agenda for us. It won't take one person, it won't take two people. It takes all of us and our boardrooms actually to be prepared to. I'm not going to use a muscle, David. It's a good. I'm going to put a sort of a more. We're going to wrap our arms around government. And so
That could be dangerous as well. Muscle up, wrap around.
to take the leadership role together, because no sector can do this on their own.
Oh, look, and also just finishing up with the fact that we have two representatives of government agencies in the room today listening to everything that's being said. And I mean, I suppose you see your role as being that enabler for many of those organisations. Could you say something about that, Sue and Brett?
Just picking up on the admin point, we certainly see part of our education role in one of our objects is about supporting a robust and independent and vibrant sector. So we certainly have information, and when I speak, I always, when I get that question, I always say it's not admin costs, needs a lot of unpicking, it's not a sort of set measure. Is it admin to have a worker with a laptop and someone that makes sure the laptop works when they're going out to someone's house to deliver a service? Of course, it's about service delivery. In terms of our role, I think we can play a role within government to help connect the parts. I know when I've been in the sector myself, the government was a bit of a mystery. You'd think, don't they all talk to each other? Surely this department knows what this department's doing. I think it's a role for us to put that data to them, to constantly, we put in submissions on inquiries, and whenever we speak to our colleagues, we try and make those connections, both for the sector to work out where they need to go, for example, in the AI sense, and also what government need to know about the sector, so if we can facilitate that conversation, we're certainly up for it.
All right. And look, we're running out of time, but I'll just go to you, Brett, because I'm really interested to know what you think the kinds of organisations are that are going to succeed well in this environment, the ones that are working best.
I mean, I think I'll just pick up on that last point, because I think, yes, it's important that we, work together and look to unlock these central opportunities and other things like this. But it's also important that everyone in this room has the agency to determine their own directions. I think not-for-profits are far more willing to band together collectively, use that purpose as a superpower, and achieve some things that an industry collective wouldn't even think to do. Right? There's far more willingness to band together, for example, as Marnie said earlier, and tell those data-enabled, connected stories about how you're actually changing people's lives. If you can band together, you can help great amounts of people. And that is, in the end, when you're going for how can we use purpose as our superpower, that means that we will be willing to do things, we'll be willing to share, we'll be willing to cooperate. And that's some things that the industry sector wouldn't even think of, because it's, that's the secret sauce, that's the private IP.
Okay.
And so let's use that opportunity and, use the connections that we make today to find new ways forward.
Well, that's brilliant. That's such a great way to finish off this panel talk. You know what you've got to do out there. You've got to spread that secret sauce. And for the next few days, that's what it's all going to be about. And so thank you very much to all of our panellists, Brett, Cass, Sue and Brett. Give them a round of applause, and thanks for listening.